I want to pay tribute up front to the 12 humanitarian workers, and I'm sure I speak for every member of this council, who have been killed since this conflict began. Protection of humanitarian workers, of their offices, of their equipment, is a central tenet of international humanitarian law. Their work is especially vital in Tigray, whereas OCHA have outlined today, and as the IPC data shows, at least 353,000 people are now in famine conditions. People have died from hunger. People are dying from hunger. People will continue to die unless they get the help they need, and get the help they need now. This is a man-made famine, and we need to act. In this regard, the United Kingdom welcomes the unilateral ceasefire declared by the government of Ethiopia. All sides, the federal government of Ethiopia, Tigray Defense Forces, Amhara militias, Eritrean Defense Forces, have an opportunity to end the cycle of violence and suffering. We urge them to take it, and we call on Eritrean forces to withdraw as requested by the Ethiopian government. Our immediate priority has to be for humanitarian assistance to get through to those that require it. The restoration of basic infrastructure, including electricity, communications, and banking services, and ensuring food and other needed goods can reach Tigray. It is essential to prevent further loss of life. Enabling humanitarian agencies to get visas for their staff and import communications equipment so they can operate effectively is imperative. Indeed, we've heard that today. Denial of humanitarian access is a direct violation of international humanitarian law. At the same time, we, the international community and UN agencies, must be ready to respond. The response to date has frankly been insufficient. The ceasefire gives us the opportunity to address this and do so urgently, increase the amount of aid reaching the starving people of Tigray, and in this regard, the United Kingdom has already allocated £47.7 million. A full and sustained ceasefire will give all parties time and space to address the root causes of this conflict through both dialogue and, importantly, reconciliation, and for an inclusive political process to be initiated. The United Kingdom welcomes and endorses African Union Commission Chairperson Faki's call for all parties to uphold their responsibilities under international law to protect civilians. He is, of course, right that a comprehensive and all-encompassing permanent ceasefire is absolutely necessary to pave the way for sustainable peace in Tigray. We will support the African Union in its efforts in pursuit of peace and stability in Tigray, Ethiopia, and indeed the wider region. And we encourage the United Nations system to consider how it can also assist as the situation develops, as part of a very much joined-up process and coherent strategy. And finally, Mr. President, Special Representative Patton and High Commissioner Bachelet have highlighted serious allegations of human rights abuses and violations. They also described systematic sexual violence, which, as the United Kingdom's Prime Minister's Special Representative on preventing sexual violence in conflict, I have been particularly moved by. The UK is supporting the ICRC and UN agencies to provide essential services to survivors of sexual violence, and an extra £16.7 million of funds were announced in June, which will support and drive towards accountability. And this week, Mr. President, we have additionally deployed an expert to advise on support for the safe collection, and this is vital, it is imperative, for the safe collection and preservation of evidence in order to bring the perpetrators of sexual violence to justice at the appropriate time. The United Kingdom welcomes the proposed inquiry of the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, and it fully supports the ongoing joint investigation between the UN Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. We will also co-sponsor a resolution on Tigray at the Human Rights Council in Geneva this month. Mr. President, transparency and accountability will be vital if Ethiopia is truly to move past this most tragic of conflicts. We collectively owe this to the victims. We owe it to the survivors. Our message is clear. It is time for all sides to put down their weapons. It is time to allow unrestricted access for humanitarian aid. And it is time now to put the interests of Ethiopian people first. I hope this Council can now work constructively with the African Union and partners to ensure progress on these most critical of issues and turn around the situation for the sake of the people of Tigray and for the sake of all Ethiopians. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank His Excellency Lord Tariq Ahmed of Wimbledon for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Merci beaucoup,
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
and Ramesh, for your insightful yet deeply troubling briefings today. Mr. President, Ethiopia is a long-standing and important partner for Ireland. For this reason, the deteriorating crisis in the Tigray region and its severe humanitarian consequences is of genuine and deep concern for us. It's a situation which we have consistently raised and sought to have this Council address since we joined the Council in January. The Council's voice matters on this issue. Today, finally, we meet publicly and all Council members have an opportunity to send a clear message to the parties on the ground. This conflict must end. Humanitarian needs must be urgently addressed. We called for today's meeting because it's clear that a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding in Tigray. It is clear that the threat of famine looms and that hundreds of thousands of people could already be starving. It is clear that without further and immediate scaled-up action, many more will die. We all have a responsibility to act immediately to save lives. Indeed, our action is overdue. Mr. President, the prospect of a large-scale famine in Ethiopia today is real. The evidence we have heard today is indisputable, and the consequences of inaction are chilling and all too predictable. As the spectre of a large-scale famine again looms for the people of Ethiopia, the international community is ready to mobilize the necessary response. However, the political steps needed to facilitate that response lie with those who are party to this conflict. Leadership to forge a path towards a political solution is needed. Mr. President, the declaration by the Ethiopian government of a unilateral ceasefire is a welcome step. However, any ceasefire must include actions that serve to improve the humanitarian situation on the ground, not create further obstacles to the humanitarian response. Reports that humanitarian access continues to be cut off, including through the destruction of key routes for humanitarian supplies, are deeply worrying and frankly shocking. We urge all parties to the conflict to cease hostilities, to protect civilians, and to allow for immediate, unimpeded, and safe humanitarian access to all parts of Tigray. We call on the Ethiopian authorities to demonstrate their commitment to the ceasefire they declared, by immediately facilitating humanitarian access. The next few days are absolutely critical in this regard as the humanitarian response restarts. We also call on the government to establish a functioning civil-military coordination mechanism to immediately restore essential services and to reopen airspace for humanitarian deliveries. Tigrayan forces must also refrain from any actions that encourage conflict or restrict humanitarian access. Beyond the food security crisis, we are deeply concerned about the wider humanitarian and human rights situation. Reports last week of the airstrike on the village market of Togoga in northern Tigray, killing and injuring hundreds of civilians, many of them children, are alarming. We call on the Ethiopian authorities to conduct an independent investigation into the incident. Last week's brutal murder of 3 MSF staff underlines the dangers faced by humanitarians. Humanitarian workers must never be targets. Such outrageous attacks must cease. I pay tribute to the efforts and courage of humanitarian workers in highly dangerous circumstances. We condemn reports that international NGOs and UN vehicles and their equipment have been destroyed or appropriated in violation of international humanitarian law. Humanitarian actors' rights under international humanitarian law need to be respected in accordance with the obligations of all parties to the conflict. We remain horrified by the conflict-related sexual violence and atrocities described by Special Representative Patton. It is clear that systematic abuses are being perpetrated by armed actors in the conflict. This Council has demanded that these and other violations end immediately. We strongly support the work of High Commissioner Bachelet and her office and attach great importance to the joint investigation with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Accountability must be ensured for all violations of international, humanitarian and human rights law to counter impunity, prevent further future violations, and provide justice for victims and survivors. Mr. President, I began today by saying we've an opportunity to send a clear message to the parties on the ground. 3 months ago, Ireland said the same thing behind closed doors and has repeated it since. Today, I believe that the message should be threefold. First, this Council should urge all parties to the conflict to cease hostilities, to protect civilians, and to allow for immediate and safe humanitarian access to all parts of Tigray. We also urge the Ethiopian authorities to demonstrate their commitment to the ceasefire by facilitating unimpeded humanitarian access immediately. Second, all parties to the conflict must fully respect international humanitarian law and human rights law. Sexual violence and atrocities against civilians and humanitarian workers must end. Humanitarians must be allowed to do their job without interference. Finally and crucially, we need all Ethiopian stakeholders to commit to a process of national dialogue that promotes reconciliation and the unity of Ethiopia. Ireland stands ready to support in any way we can. We look forward to seeing today's announcement in this regard followed through on and delivered quickly and in full. Mr. President, this is a critical moment for Ethiopia. The world is watching. We urge all parties to recognise and to meet their responsibilities, forging a way forward for all Ethiopians. This Council too must step up and play its part. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President, and allow me to congratulate you on assuming the presidency for the month and thank Estonia for guiding the Council so ably last month. Mr. President, we make this statement united as the African 3+1, namely Kenya, Niger, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Tunisia. We are united in the protection of the peace and security of Africa and the interests of African peoples and states to be upheld in the Security Council. We take note of the briefing by USG Rosemary DiCarlo and Acting USG Ramesh, and we also welcome the participation of Ethiopia and thank them for their upcoming update to the Council on the developments since we last met about 2 weeks ago for an informal interactive dialogue. We have been pained by the suffering that has been experienced by our brothers and sisters in Ethiopia because each life matters and is sacrosanct. We send our condolences to all the families who have lost members to violence, including aid workers. We are outraged and saddened by the pain of all the women and girls who have suffered sexual violence. We condemn without reservation the targeting of unarmed civilians. In doing so, we call for all parties with the means to cause harm to cease any attacks or threats to unarmed civilians. We demand that they respect international law, including humanitarian principles and the moral codes that are at the core of Africa's cultures and religions. Throughout the last months, when division and violence has been experienced in Tigray, we have argued for expanded and robust humanitarian access. We have welcomed the government's resourcing of a significant proportion of the humanitarian needs in Tigray. We have urged the international humanitarian community to move with speed and scale up assistance. We have applauded it and also been disappointed by the continuing shortfalls in its response. We call again for all states, international institutions, organizations, and individuals of goodwill to redouble their efforts in Tigray. We support the democratic aspirations of the Ethiopian people. As such, we have argued that the international community and the Security Council give the country space to undertake its most recent elections. We have been gratified by the interim reports, especially that of the African Union Election Observer Mission, asserting that, and I quote, despite some operational, logistical, security, political, and COVID-19 related challenges, overall, the pre-election and election day processes were conducted in an orderly, peaceful, and credible manner, close of quote. We hope that the election becomes a foundation of a robust national conversation on peace, cohesion, development, and the celebration of diversity and pluralism. Today, the situation in Tigray remains of concern, but there are clear opportunities for peace to emerge. Behind closed doors, we have urged this council to take careful and responsible actions that will encourage humanitarian outreach to suffering people and not to imperil the situation in Tigray. We again reiterate this strong and sincere call. We welcome the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire by the government of Ethiopia and stress that this council and the international community should appreciate this decision by the government as an opportunity that must be capitalized on. We hope that it can be translated into a permanent, comprehensive, and lasting ceasefire in order to extend humanitarian care to every man, woman, and child who needs it in every part of Tigray. That ceasefire must be heeded and implemented. We are particularly concerned about the potential implications of the recent destruction of the bridge over the Tekezi River, connecting Shire and Gonda. It is indicative of a callous attitude to the needs of civilians in crisis, and that there are parties not observing a ceasefire. We condemn the deliberate destruction of civilian objects that are vital to the delivery of humanitarian aid. These actions must be halted if we are truly to implement the silencing of the guns which Africans have set out in our Agenda 2063 to work as a region on ending all wars, civil conflicts, gender-based violence, violent conflicts, and preventing genocide. We now call for all armed parties presently in Tigray or neighboring it to heed the voice of Africa that calls for the silencing of the guns. We call on all parties that have not pronounced on the cessation of hostilities to do so without delay and to act accordingly by ceasing all armed operations. They should allow full humanitarian access to every part of Tigray. We further call for the withdrawal of any and all non-Ethiopian forces from Tigray and the standing down of all militias from neighboring federal states. This silencing of the guns serves our continental will and would allow Tigray's farmers and traders to return to their farms and shops so that they may recover their livelihoods and reduce their dependency on the outstretched hand of the humanitarians. We insist on ceasefire by all parties because we know from experience that doing so will allow the deployment of the tools available in Africa's peace and security architecture to help Ethiopia be at peace with itself. The people and the government of Ethiopia appreciate the power of the instruments of dialogue and reconciliation forged by Africans these past few decades. After all, most of the agreements that built our peace and security architecture were forged in Addis Ababa by our heads of state and government with Ethiopia's constructive involvement. We now recommend its tools to Ethiopia to make use of them, as many of us have done. Doing so will show our peoples and the world that we have processes and skills that can indeed deliver African solutions to African challenges. The A3+1 therefore calls for all Ethiopian parties in conflict in Tigray to cease hostilities and undertake inclusive dialogue as a path to national reconciliation. In our view, dialogue is strength, and it is at the core of the African identity. Embrace it and save the precious lives of the people of Tigray to protect your national peace and once again be an anchor of regional security. As we have done in closed sessions, we reiterate once again that the Council should always listen to Africa when it comes to African issues. The Council should also allow the continent the space to resolve its challenges with the support of the international community. We do not make this assertion because we are infallible. Rather, it is because Africa today has a realizable vision of itself growing into a peaceful, united, independent, and prosperous community of nations. We suffer the most from our challenges and gain the most from solving them. It is therefore critical that the Security Council as a whole and its members understand that this debate should encourage and support African solutions, meaning in this instance, Ethiopian solutions starting in the order of ceasefire, humanitarian delivery, dialogue, reconciliation, and responsibility. Among the tools Africa has built is the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We note the launching of a commission of inquiry on Tigray launched on the 17th of June this year. We look forward to its thorough investigations that will allow for accountability against perpetrators of atrocities. We look forward to its findings supporting the cause of the Ethiopian people, establishing the truth of what has happened in Tigray, and using that truth to build a stronger Ethiopia. We as Africa will not agree now or in future for this debate to be turned into a platform that undermines the people and state of Ethiopia. Now is the time for careful diplomacy, the rapid scale-up of humanitarian response, prioritizing people, appreciation of regional stability, and the curbing of misinformation and disinformation. We recall the heights of greatness the civilization of Ethiopia, like others in Africa, has achieved. We know that disruptions and destructions have occurred in our history. We suffer our challenges today, as Ethiopia is presently doing, but our spiritual yearning for reconciliation and unity is unquenchable. In saying that, we, the A3+1, conclude by reaffirming our respect for and commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. We stand in solidarity with the government and the people of Ethiopia at this defining moment in their pursuit of sustainable peace that is conducive to nation building and prosperity. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Since this is the first meeting under the French presidency, I would like to express to you the full support of Mexico during this month of work. We'd also like to thank Estonia for all of their work during their presidency last month. We'd also like to thank the presidency for having organized this meeting this afternoon, and we thank the Undersecretary General De Carlo and Acting Undersecretary General Rajasingham for their briefings. And we also welcome the Minister of State, Lord Tariq Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister of State for the Commonwealth, the United Nations and South Asia, and also the representative of Ethiopia. After 8 months of clashes, the situation in Tigray is very complex. The humanitarian situation is a source of grave concern. The conflict, as we've heard, has led to thousands of deaths, displacing millions, forcing thousands to flee, some of them towards Sudan, increasing the pressure on a country which is already going through its own delicate phase of transition. Tigray and other parts of Ethiopia have been affected by the triple threat of climate events, the locust storms, and COVID-19. The conflict is bringing us to a turning point. The continuation of hostilities would lead to a second interruption of the harvest season, and the persistence of hindrances for humanitarian access would considerably increase the probability of a generalized famine. The weakened infrastructure of hospitals is running the risk of collapsing, increasing the danger of there being a spread of transmissible and preventable diseases. The ethnic and intra-community tensions could be exacerbated, and the conflict could become extended not only to other parts of Ethiopia, but also to the other parts of the Horn of Africa. Mr. President, Mexico is concerned, and we condemn as a country all attacks against civilians and humanitarian staff. The attacks in Togoga, which led to tens of civilian deaths and more than 180 wounded, as well as against staff of Médecins Sans Frontières, are simply unacceptable. And also the reports that access is being denied to medical staff who are providing medical assistance to the injured. Let's be clear about this. This represents an unacceptable violation of international humanitarian law. It's as simple as that. Bearing in mind the multiple needs that there are on the ground, it is particularly outrageous that those that have the role of helping the population are they themselves the target of attacks, including entering into offices of the United Nations and confiscating telecoms equipment. That's why it's fundamental that there be accountability for what has happened in the context of the conflict, and particularly with regard to the multiple allegations of violations of international humanitarian law and human rights. An urgent, impartial, and independent investigation is crucial in order to clarify the facts and to provide justice. Mr. President, Mexico welcomes the announcement on the 28th of June of the government of Ethiopia of a humanitarian ceasefire in Tigray, and calls upon all the other parties to the conflict to cease any kind of hostility to ensure humanitarian access that is unlimited, irrespective of ethnic origin or political affiliations, to abstain from obstructing or damaging critical infrastructure such as communication services, bridges and roads, which would have the consequence of isolating the area and undermining supply lines. Mexico, my country, calls for a withdrawal of the Eritrean forces from Ethiopia. The parties to the conflict must think about the consequences of their actions over the last months and recognize that there is no military solution to the conflict. Mexico calls upon all the parties to seek a solution through dialogue, beginning with a process of national reconstruction and reconciliation. Finally, it is essential to ensure ongoing regional and sub-regional involvement and mediation, as well as the support of the Security Council for all actions which lead to a political dialogue. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Je remercie la
I thank the representative of Mexico for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, first I'd like to congratulate France on assuming the presidency of Council for this month, and I'd like to thank Ethiopia, Estonia for successfully presiding over this council last month. I thank USG Carlo and acting USG Rajasingham for their briefings. I welcome the presence at this meeting of the Ethiopian PR Ambassador Taye Aske Selassie Amde. Ethiopia is an anchor of stability in the Horn of Africa, vital to regional peace and security. A peaceful and stable Ethiopia is the common wish of all Ethiopians, and other African countries and the international community at large would want nothing less. China has been closely following with concern the situation in the Tigray region. The government of Ethiopia has recently announced a unilateral ceasefire in the state of Tigray to restore normalcy in farming and humanitarian operations in the region, which China welcomes. We look forward to a comprehensive ceasefire in Tigray and support the parties concerned to resolve their differences through political dialogue, so that all people in Ethiopia, including those in the state of Tigray, can enjoy peace and stability on their way towards development and prosperity. China supports the AU's continued constructive role and welcomes the assistance extended to Ethiopia by AU Commission Chairperson Faki. For some time now, the government of Ethiopia has been actively responding to the humanitarian needs in Tigray, offering relief to the population in distress, reopening local economy, getting life back to normal, and providing full humanitarian access with positive results. Humanitarian operations in Tigray are dogged by dire shortages of resources, which makes it imperative for the international community to scale up its emergency humanitarian assistance. In this process, the UN humanitarian principles must be fully respected. The Chinese government's food aid will be arriving in short order, and COVID-19 vaccines donated by China to Ethiopia also benefit the Tigrayans. China appreciates the tremendous amount of work done by international humanitarian agencies to alleviate the plight of the local population, strongly condemns the attacks targeting humanitarian workers, and notes that the government of Ethiopia has launched an investigation into these attacks. Right now, Ethiopia's effort to keep peace and development on track is still being challenged in many ways. China is also closely following the developments in Tigray. However, the Tigrayan issue is, by and large, an internal affair of Ethiopia, and we believe in the wisdom and ability of the Ethiopian people to find a proper solution. The international community, while providing assistance, must fully respect the sovereignty and leadership of Ethiopia, as the purpose of such assistance is to work together to help the country overcome its difficulties and maintain peace and stability both in Ethiopia and in the region. When dealing with this issue, the Security Council should carefully and prudently calibrate the timing and the approach taken to make sure that whatever this Council does will contribute to improving the situation in Tigray rather than the opposite. China stands ready to work with the rest of the international community to this end. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Estonia.
I thank Undersecretary General Di Carlo and Acting Undersecretary General Rajasingham for their briefings. I welcome the timely holding of the first open council meeting on the situation in Tigray. The declaration of ceasefire by the Ethiopian government is a welcome first step towards the resolution of the conflict in Tigray. It is essential that it will be followed by immediate cessation of hostilities and that all parties adhere to the international humanitarian law and international human rights law. urgent, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access is needed, and essential services like electricity and telecommunications must be restored to enable humanitarian workers to provide help. The food insecurity in Tigray is deteriorating each day, and some regions are already facing famine. Food aid must be allowed to be delivered to those in need without any delay. For a sustainable solution to the food insecurity, immediate cessation of hostilities is vital for allowing the farmers to plant crops. We condemn violence against the humanitarian workers and their assets, as this is against the international humanitarian law. The brutal killings of 3 representatives of Médecins Sans Frontières must be investigated immediately and the perpetrators brought to justice. There is also no justification to the illegal entering into the premises of humanitarian agencies and dismantling their communications equipment. We are worried that the situation in Tigray continues to be volatile and the civilians are bearing the brunt of the conflict. It was reminded again last week when an airstrike near Mekelle killed around 80 civilians and injured around 200. Targeting of civilians and blocking medical aid is completely unacceptable. We call for an urgent and independent investigation into the incident. The reports of continued violations and abuses of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including widespread sexual and gender-based violence, are deeply worrying. The commitment of the government of Ethiopia to engage with the UN mechanisms on investigating alleged violations and abuses is welcome. We urge all parties to ensure unfettered access for the investigators. We are concerned about numerous violations committed by the Eritrean troops and call for their immediate withdrawal. The clearly destabilizing role of Eritrean troops, including by obstructing humanitarian aid, has been widely reported. It is important that the end of fighting will not be temporary, but will be followed by a comprehensive, inclusive, and credible political process with the aim of national reconciliation. Finally, it is clear that the ongoing conflict in Tigray constitutes a threat to international peace and security, which is why it is vital that the issue remains a priority in the Council's agenda. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. I thank the representative of Estonia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Acting Undersecretary General Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Ramesh Rajasingham for their briefings on the recent developments in Tigray region in Ethiopia. I also welcome the presence of His Excellency Lord Tariq Ahmed of Wimbledon and the permanent representative of Ethiopia at this meeting. The people of Tigray region in Ethiopia have suffered during the 8-month-long fighting. The announcement of a humanitarian ceasefire in the Tigray region is therefore a welcome development. We commend the government of Ethiopia for taking this decision and welcome the measures it has taken to address the humanitarian situation. This positive step should help ease the tensions and sufferings of the people. We hope that today's meeting will help in de-escalating the situation on the ground and bring about reconciliation and peace in the region. We also believe that the presence of external armed actors in the Tigray region militate against return to peace, and we call for an end to this. It is important that all stakeholders respect the ceasefire, allow humanitarian aid to reach all those in need, and allow for regular farming activities to take place. This ceasefire period must be used for scaling up humanitarian aid immediately, which must reach those areas where access has been difficult due to the violence. We continue to urge all humanitarian agencies and the authorities to scale up and coordinate to bridge the gaps on the ground, especially since there has been a cumulative set of factors which has made the situation worse. We appreciate the fact that the Ethiopian authorities have not only been providing humanitarian assistance, but have also granted humanitarian access to a majority of areas under stress and encourage it to continue on that path. We also underscore the importance of adhering to the UN guiding principles of humanitarian assistance, and we also call for protecting all humanitarian workers. India calls for restraint and engagement by all stakeholders in a spirit of dialogue and reconciliation. We urge that the space provided by this humanitarian ceasefire be used to open channels of communication, pursue dialogue, and find a peaceful and sustainable solution. All stakeholders must desist from rhetoric and threats, spreading misinformation, and raising tensions during the ceasefire. Instead, steps must be taken by all stakeholders to disengage and reduce tensions and work towards restoration of normalcy in the lives of people in the affected region. We call on the Ethiopian government to sustain the ceasefire and find a way to address this conflict in a manner that serves the interests of all its people in line with the federal constitutional provisions. We also encourage the government of Ethiopia to follow up on their commitments to investigate all allegations of human rights violations and to persist in efforts to hold the perpetrators to account in accordance with the law. We look forward to an early conclusion of the investigation by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN OHCHR. In conclusion, Mr. President, India reiterates its strong commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. Thank you, President. First of all, foremost, I would like to congratulate France on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for July and wish you every success. And also thank Estonia for the successful presidency June this year. We very carefully listened to the briefings on the situation in Tigray from USG DiCarlo and acting USG for Humanitarian Affairs, Ramesh Rajasingham. We also welcome the personal participation of the permanent representative to the UN of Ethiopia, Tahir Selassie. President, first of all, I'd like to express our regret as to the format of today's meeting and caution our colleagues against using it to further destabilize an already complex situation in Tigray and weakening the political position of the federal authorities there. We believe the problem today, in one way or another, is an internal affair of Ethiopia, and we shouldn't forget about that. We're closely following the development of the complex situation, and we believe that the Ethiopian federal government's unilateral decision on the 28th of June for immediate cessation of hostilities in Tigray is a step in the right direction. We hope that all warring parties will demonstrate the necessary political will, which would enable to put an end to this bloodshed and improve the humanitarian situation and gradually bring about social-economic stabilization and allow us to allow crops to be planted and IDPs to return home. We call on all partners of Addis Ababa to support steps taken by the Ethiopian government for a return to peace for the region and for life to return to normal. We also believe that in addressing this domestic Ethiopian conflict, there is a decisive role to be played by Ethiopians themselves, with assistance first and foremost from the African community. The new turn of events in the region should not distract from addressing the ongoing serious socio-economic problems in Tigray. In recent months, the Ethiopian government has made a substantial contribution to rebuilding destroyed infrastructure and meeting humanitarian needs in the region. On data that we have available to us, they have spent more than $2.5 billion on this. We call on OCHA and humanitarian agencies working in the region to continue to accompany these efforts fully in line with UN General Assembly Resolution 46182 and fully complying with the guiding principles of humanitarian assistance. We expect the humanitarian community to draw up an objective picture of the humanitarian situation and define the real requirements of the people in the region. We are aware that a group of Western countries submitted a draft resolution to the 47th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on the human rights situation in Tigray, which, as we see it, has an accusatory slant towards the Ethiopia's leadership. We share the concerns about human rights problems caused by the conflict in Tigray, and we believe that the aim of adopting such a document is not to accuse and punish, but to try and tackle and prevent human rights violations, whoever commits them. In conclusion, we'd like to reaffirm the Russian Federation's readiness to continue to support normalizing the situation in Tigray. We believe it is unacceptable to politicize this problem. The situation in Tigray must remain a domestic issue of Ethiopia, and we believe that interference by the Security Council in solving it is counterproductive. Thank you.
Je remercie
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
I thank you, Mr. President, and I congratulate you to presuming the presidency of this month. I thank Estonia for excellent presidency last month. I would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo and acting USG Rasmet Radasingham for their insightful briefing. I welcome Minister of State of United Kingdom and Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Ethiopia to our meeting today. Mr. President, the situation in the Tigray region of Ethiopia over the last month has witnessed complicated development. It has resulted in multifaceted hardship for millions of people. We share concerns of international community, including those expressed by the Secretary General about the alarming level of violence and killings against civilians, including women, children, and humanitarian workers, as well as destruction of infrastructures indispensable to civilian population in Tigray. These acts of violence are totally unacceptable and run counter to international humanitarian law. We call for immediate cessation of hostility, upholding responsibility under international humanitarian law, and ensuring the protection of civilians, especially women and children, with a view to so addressing the mounting difficulties that the people have to face after months of hostility. Mr. President, the ongoing humanitarian situation in Tigray is of much concern. We welcome the effort by the government of Ethiopia in order to help alleviate the above-mentioned difficulties. The conflict is resulting in other systemic issues that may lead to further deterioration, especially the high risk of famine. Children are suffer the most. UNICEF projects that 56,000 children under the age of 5 in Tigray will need treatment this year for severe acute malnutrition. 33,000 children in inaccessible part of Tigray will face imminent death unless they are given immediate help. In the face of such dangers, we call on all parties to fulfill their obligation under humanitarian law to prevent the famine from occurring. It is important now to ensure safe, effective, and efficient delivery of and access to humanitarian assistance in the Tigray region and bordering area. In this process, this assessment and delivery of humanitarian assistance should be taken into account local particularities and in consultation with the government of Ethiopia. Mr. President, while responding to humanitarian need is one urgent task, it is equally important to earnestly strive for the peaceful solution of differences among parties concerned. The current crisis stems from the complicated political, historical, and ethnic reasons. And this background requires relevant parties to patiently engage in dialogue and reconciliation rather than further hatred. It is high time for a compromise to be made toward a comprehensive solution for sustained stability and development in Ethiopia on the basis of principles of international law and the UN Charter. We call on Ethiopian authority and on other concerned parties to give the highest priority to the interest of its people. In this process, the international community, including the Security Council, should support all efforts toward this end, in full respect of independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. And in this connection, we welcome the recent ceasefire declaration by the government of Ethiopia and expect all parties to make it a long-term and comprehensive one. Furthermore, We call on all parties concerned to take advantage of this opportunity to engage in constructive dialogue and refrain from further bloodshed and confrontational rhetoric that may drive each other further apart. And we believe that it is the only way, viable path, for finding a common ground and a peaceful way out of the current crisis in Ethiopia. Mr. President, the conflict and situation in Tigray have had certain impact on the region that require relevant parties to exercise self-restraint. And under these circumstances, the principle of non-interference in international affairs of state and settlement dispute by peaceful means should always be upheld. And in this connection, we support the constructive engagement of neighboring countries and international organizations, especially AU and IGAD, in supporting the party concerned to promote dialogue, build trust, and provide humanitarian assistance for Ethiopia so as to help its people return to normal life. The efforts so far by various humanitarian agencies, including those of the UN, are highly commendable. We call on international community to continue to support the Ethiopian people in their pursuits for peace, reconciliation, and reconstruction of their countries. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President, and thank you to the briefers. 8 months of armed conflict in Tigray, the situation remains critical and highly unpredictable. Humanitarian needs are overwhelming. Up to 900,000 people are likely suffering from near famine conditions, with millions more at risk. Critical aid is being blocked, and humanitarians are prevented from saving lives. The current situation is extremely fluid, and information is difficult to obtain. President, in my intervention today, I would like to address 4 key points. First, we reiterate and emphasize our call for unrestricted and unconditional humanitarian access into and within all parts of Tigray. We welcome the federal government's declaration of a unilateral ceasefire on humanitarian grounds and call on all parties to move towards a permanent ceasefire. However, despite this positive step, we have received credible reports from several border crossings that humanitarian actors are still being denied access. Let me be clear. The primary responsibility of the protection of citizens rests with the state. The central government of Ethiopia must ensure humanitarian access into Tigray. Humanitarian actors must immediately be allowed to cross the front lines with personnel and supplies. And the restoration of basic infrastructure, electricity, banking, telecommunication, access to fuel and internet are all critical to scale up the humanitarian response. All parties must also comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law. They must respect the protected status of aid workers and civilians and refrain from unacceptable destruction or removal of objects that are indispensable to the survival of the population. Second, impunity cannot be tolerated. We condemn in the strongest term the reported killings of civilians and the widespread and systematic acts of sexual and gender-based violence. All violations and abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law should be documented and verified with a view to future investigation and prosecution of those responsible. Accountability for crimes and gross violations, including individual accountability under criminal law, must be ensured. This will be key to reinstate public trust in justice and security institutions and lay the foundation for reconciliation and sustainable peace. In this respect, we welcome the joint investigation by OHCHR and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, as well as the African Commission on Human and People's Rights Independent Commission of Inquiry into alleged atrocities in Tigray. We expect that all findings will be used to ensure accountability. My third point, President, is that the conflict in Tigray threatens regional stability. We call on neighboring states to refrain from aggravating the situation. The continued presence of Eritrean troops in Tigray is a threat to regional peace and security and must end. We call for their immediate withdrawal. And fourth, the conflict in Tigray cannot be resolved by military means. The recent elections in Ethiopia have taken place in very challenging conditions. But, as we can see in this situation, election alone cannot bring democratic transition or resolve the political challenges currently being faced. A meaningful, inclusive national dialogue is needed to enable Ethiopia's democratic development and to reduce conflict across the country. In Tigray, we strongly urge all actors to work across divides and prepare the ground for a possible dialogue. A political solution is the only way to a sustainable peace in Tigray and Ethiopia as a whole. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de la Norvège.
I thank the representative of Norway for her statement, and I will now deliver a statement in my capacity as representative of France. I'd like to thank Madame De Carlo and Mr. Rajasingham for their briefings, and I would like to stress 4 points. After 8 months of conflict, the retaking of Mekelle by Tigray forces shows that there will be no military solution to the crisis. The announcement of a ceasefire could be a major development if it is rapidly consolidated. We call upon all parties to act responsibly by expressing without delay their commitment to a definitive cessation of hostilities and also an end to all forms of violence against the population. The Eritrean forces must immediately leave Ethiopian territory in accordance with the request formulated by the Ethiopian authorities last March. We take note of the information regarding the redeployment of the forces towards the border, which must be quickly verified. Secondly, it is a matter of urgency to ensure safe and unhindered humanitarian access. There are immense humanitarian needs, and electricity must be restored, as well as communications and banking services. We call for a lifting of all barriers, particularly by the reopening of the Mekelle airport, the granting of long-term visas to humanitarian workers, and the authorization of satellite communications. Vital infrastructure for providing aid to the population must be preserved. France renews its condemnation of the deadly attacks that struck the workers of Médecins Sans Frontières. At least 12 workers have lost their lives since the beginning of the conflict. These crimes must not go unpunished. The protection of humanitarian and medical staff is an obligation that applies to all the parties. The preservation of the unity and territorial integrity of Ethiopia is a priority. That's my third point. The launching of a national dialogue, including representatives of all parties and all regions, must contribute to this. We call upon all of the political and military forces in Ethiopia to abstain from any action which could add to the instability. Reconciliation also means fighting impunity. It is imperative that the investigation into serious violations of human rights committed in Tigray continue, led jointly by the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. It is important that credible investigations are carried out in full transparency. And finally, France is concerned at the impact of the crisis on regional stability. We call upon countries in the region to resolve their differences through dialogue and to respond constructively to the mediation efforts of the African Union. I thank you. I now resume my functions as President of the Council, and now I give the floor to the representative of Ethiopia.
Mr. President, let me begin by congratulating you for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month. I assure you of my delegation's full support. Mr. President, my country, Ethiopia, is undergoing a significant transformation that requires delicate and context-driven handling of its domestic affairs. In our bilateral meetings with members of the Council and the informal dialogue we had last month, we have exchanged views and concerns, all of which the government of Ethiopia approached and acted upon in a constructive manner. This being said, Mr. President, I'm surprised by the rationales of calling for this open meeting. We are fully cognizant of the responsibility of this Council to work towards international peace and security. The very first requisite for this onerous responsibility is to encourage dialogue and prevent escalation through constructive engagement and reinforcement of achievements. This meeting is called at a time when the government of Ethiopia took bold measures and political decisions to meet the needs and well-being of its people affected by the law enforcement operation in Tigray. This measure should have encouraged our friends to give support and de-escalate the unhelpful pressure. Equally, we wish to express our appreciation to all of you for recognizing our resolve for peace behind this difficult initiative we have taken. Mr. President, since the Council held the informal interactive dialogue on the humanitarian situation in Ethiopia, there are critical developments that deserve your recognition and constructive outlook. On 28 June 2021, the government of Ethiopia decided to cease the active military engagement of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces in the Tigray region. This decision for humanitarian ceasefire was reached after a concerted deliberation with various stakeholders and partners. We hope that this magnanimous and far-sighted decision will not be wasted by the irresponsible conduct of the TPLF group, which the government of Ethiopia opted to tolerate for the sake of the people of Tigray and to elevate the humanitarian situation in the region. The decision to cease military operation is hoped to create a conducive environment for humanitarian operation in Tigray. It will also pave the way for an inclusive national dialogue. The TPLF group that we're pursuing continued its belligerence to protect few individuals. In furtherance of its agenda, it began conscripting young and elderly civilians, women and men, to fight highly trained and armed men of their country. This exposed the people in Tigray for the military confrontation that are not prepared for. Furthermore, it posed a risk for disruption to the agricultural season. The group's ethnically charged tactic of vying the people against the government is also found to be detrimental to our innate social fabric. As a result, the government of Ethiopia, as the bearer of their primary responsibility to protect its people, made a difficult political decision to suspend active military operation in favor of safeguarding the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the Ethiopian state. Now we believe we have created a space for unfettered humanitarian assistance and proper conduct for the agricultural planting season. In addition, we will augment humanitarian efforts in the region, including distribution of food and non-food items from warehouses across Tigray. The National Disaster Risk Management Commission and the 5 humanitarian agencies deployed in all waradas of the region are set to resume their function. Furthermore, we are in the process of adapting the humanitarian assistance guideline and coordination mechanism to the new development. Public services will also resume once we create a situation for the safe operation of the infrastructure and their operators. Mr. President, Ethiopia faces the inevitable journey of addressing the political and structural underpinnings of what we had experienced last November when our defense forces were attacked from within. The immediate need lies in creating an environment for the delivery of much-needed humanitarian assistance. In this regard, the government will continue to exert maximum effort and allocate the available resource towards this end. We welcome and appreciate the concern expressed by the Council members for our compatriots in Tigray who have regrettably sustained the burden of the impact of the law enforcement operation due to the cowardly tactics of the TPLF group. It is important to underline that wounds and sufferings of all Ethiopians are unacceptable. The shortcomings in preventing these sufferings are not something the government belittles. In the same vein, we take our responsibility to ensure accountability and remedy these problems with maximum seriousness. For absolute clarity, I would like to reaffirm my government's firm commitment to these core responsibilities of the state. There certainly are internal as well as external factors that play into the security challenges we are facing. The external security threats against us through no fault of or provocation on our part are complicating our internal political dynamics and distract us from key national priorities. I wish to implore this Council to act with full awareness of this external challenge Ethiopia is facing. Mr. President, following the organization of peaceful and successful national elections this month, efforts are now geared towards building a stronger, united, and democratic country. In this connection, the Ethiopian government is developing a roadmap for inclusive dialogue to ensure a lasting peace and stability. I want to reaffirm my government's resolve to continue ensuring accountability for human rights abuse and crimes committed in the Tigray region. We will make sure that impunity is not tolerated. We remain committed to work with all bilateral and multilateral partners through genuine partnership and understanding that the government of Ethiopia is more than capable of overcoming these challenges. We encourage Council members to play a constructive role in supporting the Ethiopian government in the implementation of the humanitarian ceasefire. We thank Council members who have welcomed this positive gesture again. In contrast, I would like to make it clear that the political pressure and hasty bilateral coercive measures against Ethiopia are unacceptable and violate basic tenets of international law. Excessive pressures will put this ancient country of 110 million people to the precipice and deep ravine with no possibility of recovery. The people of Ethiopia are indeed watching and should not perceive that our pronouncement is pushing them to the abyss and into the endless political fissure. For Ethiopia, it is a moment of introspection, a genuine revisit of our success and challenges. The main issue is how to heal our wounds. There are uncompleted grievings, mournings, such as the Maikadra massacre by the TPLF youth group, the suffering of the people of Wolkayet and Tagade, who have been evicted from their ancestral land over the last 30 years. So there needs to be proper closure. The political culture of impunity should have closure. We know that what exalts us as a nation is to overcome our own challenges. What would elevate us as a nation is our commitment and the commitment of our people to stand for peace. We might be poor, but we have also hope. We are people with values, cherished ones. For Ethiopia, hope is still alive. In conclusion, I hope Council members will take the situation in my country in the right perspective, understand the magnitude of the challenges we face, and also recognize the important step that we have taken in this regard. What we really need at the moment is the support, understanding, and solidarity of the international community. That's why I want to end by appealing to international partners and friends of our country to continue scaling up humanitarian support to meet humanitarian needs across Ethiopia. I thank Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Back here. I get them? It's far enough that the cameras don't see the backs of the reporters. Very good. How do you want President? Oh, I forgot about that. Sorry? Forgot about that. Yeah. Well, after the whole card. Right, this on for what do you want me on this side? Oh, I think we'll be on this side. Okay, I'll put it on this side. Okay. Yeah, so I'll be there. It's a nice walk. Everybody wants. It's supposed to be very good sounds.
Those are the two main. Hello, Ambassador. Hello. Still not have my coffee with you. He's coming. He's coming? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Martin Kimani. I'm Kenya's permanent representative to the United Nations, and I serve as the coordinator of the A3+1, who are, of course, Niger, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Tunisia, and Kenya. We wanted to make this statement to further our statement in the Security Council so that the wider public knows our position. We're very pained by the suffering experienced by our brothers and sisters in Tigray these past months. We send our condolences to all the families who have lost members to violence, including aid workers. We're very outraged and saddened by the pain of all the women and girls who have suffered sexual violence. We condemn without reservation the targeting of unarmed civilians. In doing so, we call for all parties with the means to cause harm to cease any attacks or threats to unarmed civilians. We are very concerned about the potential implications of the destruction of the bridge over the Tekezi River that connects Shire and Gonda. It is indicative of a callous attitude to the needs of civilians in crisis. We further condemn the killing of 3 staff members of Doctors Without Borders in Tigray on the 25th of June. We demand that all parties respect international law, including humanitarian principles and the moral codes that are at the core of Africa's cultures and religions. Throughout the last months, when division and violence have been experienced in Tigray, we have welcomed the government's resourcing of a significant proportion of the humanitarian needs. We again urge the international community to move with speed and scale up assistance. These efforts should be clearly and strongly supported by the Ethiopian government and all parties, with all impediments being removed. We also support the democratic aspiration of the Ethiopian people as expressed in their most recent election. We are gratified by the interim reports, especially that of the African Union Election Observer Mission, which remarked that the polls were carried out in an, I quote, orderly, peaceful, and credible manner. We hope, close quote, we hope that the election becomes the foundation of a robust national conversation on peace, cohesion, development, and the celebration of diversity and pluralism. Today, the situation in Tigray remains of concern, but there are clear opportunities for peace to emerge. We welcome the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire by the government of Ethiopia and stress that the Security Council and the international community should appreciate this announcement as an opportunity that must be capitalized on. We hope that it can be translated into a permanent, comprehensive, and lasting ceasefire in order to extend humanitarian care to every man, woman, and child who needs it in every part of Tigray. That ceasefire must be heeded and implemented if we are to implement the silencing of the guns which Africans have set out in our Agenda 2063. We therefore call on all parties in Tigray that have not pronounced themselves on the cessation of hostilities to do so without delay and to act accordingly by ceasing all armed operations. We further call for the withdrawal of any and all non-Ethiopian forces from Tigray and the immediate standing down of all militias from neighboring federal states. This silencing of the guns will allow Tigray's farmers and traders to return to their farms and shops so that they recover their livelihoods. A ceasefire by all parties will allow the deployment of the tools available in Africa's peace and security architecture to help Ethiopia be at peace with itself. The people and the government of Ethiopia appreciate the instruments of dialogue and reconciliation forged by Africans these past few decades. After all, most of the agreements that built this peace and security architecture were forged in Addis Ababa by our heads of state and government with Ethiopia's constructive involvement. One of those tools is the African Commission on Peoples and Human and People's Rights, which on June 17th launched a commission of inquiry on Tigray. In the Security Council, we commended the commission and looked forward to its thorough investigations into what has happened, and for those investigations to lead to the holding of perpetrators to account and to forging a stronger Ethiopia. We recommend the tools that Africa has built to Ethiopia to make use of, as many of us have done. Doing so will show our people and the world that we have the processes and skills that can indeed deliver African solutions to African challenges. We have today urged the Security Council to encourage and support Ethiopian solutions supported by the region, starting in the order of ceasefire, humanitarian delivery, dialogue, reconciliation, and responsibility. Now is the time for careful diplomacy, the rapid scale-up of humanitarian response, prioritizing people, appreciation of regional stability, and the curbing of misinformation and disinformation. We reaffirm our respect for and commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. We know that the people of Ethiopia have the means and the desire to attain sustained peace, nation building, and prosperity. Thank you.
Ambassador, if there is not an end to the violence and the killings and the human rights abuses, do you believe that the Security Council should then take further action?
As the A3+1, we have not made any decision on that. We are hopeful and confident that the ceasefire announced by the government of Ethiopia will be reflected by other armed actors. And that
A3+1, can you tell us, would Kenya support further action in the Security Council if the violence does not stop?
Kenya is focused on encouraging Ethiopia to undertake its own national processes and to make use of the region's goodwill and hand of assistance.
Ambassador, it's Pamela Falk from CBS News. How do you see the end game, so to speak? What is the final result? When you say reconciliation, do you mean a parliament or a group, different representation with Tigray in it, in the government? And what do you see in terms of an investigation into the atrocities? Are you supporting that?
Well, our statement, what our statement is trying to indicate first is to reflect that Africa has faced similar challenges in the past and has resolved them. And we observe that that resolution has always been through dialogue and a process of national reconciliation. And that is what we're calling on Ethiopia to do, using those instruments that I've just spoken about. So I think that our statement probably speaks as fully as we possibly can go at this time. Thank you.
An investigation?
As we said, we appreciated the African Commission on Peoples and Human Rights launching a commission of inquiry on Tigray. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, I had one last question. The Undersecretary General
Hello. That's right. Thank you very much. I got you. You're good. Well, hello. Good afternoon, and we had have a very frank and open discussion at the council. It was not our preference to have an open meeting or open briefing, because it's a matter that constitutes an internal domestic matter. But I just want to underline that my country, Ethiopia, is undergoing a significant transformation that indeed requires delicate and context-driven handling of complex domestic challenges. We are discussing about a country of 110 million people with over 80 nations and nationalities, or ethnic groups. There's always a delicate balance. So we asked the Council to be considerate of this political dynamics that, if not properly handled, will push us to the deep river and to the abyss of point of no return. So we also highlight in our meeting that the government Ethiopia has successfully conducted national election in which millions of Ethiopians voted for peace and stability. were quite stunned and surprised that millions came out and casted their vote. The task of the next government, once formed, is to ensure lasting peace and stability throughout the country. As you heard, on June 28th, the government declared a unilateral ceasefire to create a conducive environment for humanitarian operation and pave the way for an inclusive dialogue of all Ethiopians. We also urge members of the Council to understand the magnitude of the challenge we face and also recognize the bold and difficult decision we took to cease the law enforcement operation. We remain ready and committed to work with all partners to scale up humanitarian assistance, ensure accountability for alleged crimes, and enable the people of Tigray to partake in the agricultural planting season. Go ahead, James.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador. Good to see you again. I'm afraid you're probably not going to like my question. You're a long-serving diplomat, very respected. You were on the Security Council just 3 years ago. Do you not feel uncomfortable representing a government that, with its Eritrean allies, has been accused of carrying out executions, massacres, rape, and hindering the delivery of humanitarian aid?
Well, James, I completely disagree with the way the question is constructed. Because my government responded to the attack perpetrated by the TPLF operators. In the middle of the night, over 600 officers were brutally murdered in their camps. Would there be any world government that would allow to let it go, such kind of atrocities? So that indeed started the whole conflict.
Along with the Eritreans?
As in any conflict, there are excesses. It's not only, in the engagement, of course, there were crimes committed by different armed groups. Those who are responsible for committing crimes, or the government time and again ascertain, will be made responsible. There won't be any impunity whatsoever. So we are fully engaged. An investigation has to be taken. Yes, indeed, I have been serving here at the United Nations for many years. I have heard all the dooms and glooms of poor nations being brought here at the Council and abashed for what they did and for what they didn't do or thought about it. But as a responsible nation state, as an older country in the world, I tell you, we have the full responsibility and accountability for whatever happened in Tigray.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, warned today of the possibility of more conflict in Western Tigray, which is still occupied by forces from neighboring Amhara, which were fighting alongside your army. What can you do to ensure that the Amhara forces return to Amhara and leave Western Tigray?
Well, the Amhara people believe that they are in their rightful ancestral land. These were forcibly incorporated in 1992 without any due process or any constitutional arrangement. I came from that part of the country, from my mother's side. A community that speaks fluent Amharic and fluent Tigrinya. I thought back then this would be a small chromosomes of the Ethiopian society that believes in diversity, that can speak many languages, and yet live peacefully together. This was so. There is a process that is going on right now. There is no any intention to take over land, but the government has an institution that has been put in place. This is called Regional Border Commission. So it is going to be, the case will be submitted to that board, and then of course a decision will be made. That could be probably after the new government is in place.
So does that mean that the Ethiopian government supports the Amhara forces remaining in Western Tigray until that commission makes a decision?
Well, I think that is in fact a matter of fact.
Ambassador, it's Pamela Falk from
Pamela.
CBS News. Are you at all horrified by the kinds of attacks that have taken place? You mentioned the Army barracks attack that began this crisis. That's military to military. We're talking about mass rape, we're talking about young boys being recruited, and we're talking about forced famine. What is your reaction to the crimes that have occurred?
Well, whoever committed a crime should be accountable. From the Ethiopian government side, from the rebels, and as I said earlier, there should not be impunity at all. Because we are taught to go away with the crimes anyone has committed in the past. That was the order that we have seen over the last 30 years during when TPLF was in power. So there's a determination and a commitment from the government that everybody has to be accountable. We have seen some horrendous crimes. I'm not going to here and just simply evade those questions, because there are so many unsolved griefs and closed mournings. For us, in order to heal, we have to come together and commit ourselves, and then through national dialogue, solve our national wounds.
Thank you, Ambassador. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. We heard from the UN today that the number of people in famine has risen now from 350,000 to 400,000. Could we get your response to that, given that the government disputed the previous figures of 350,000? And the US ambassador said that if there's a denial, she sort of insinuated that if some of these accusations that have been made about the destruction of the bridge, the looting of aid agencies, that is not a humanitarian ceasefire, it would be more of a siege. And if you could respond to that.
Well, that's honestly, that's unhelpful, because there's a commitment from the government, and particularly the leadership. They make that decision at the heavy political risks, because the determination was to save lives in Tigray and the vicinity of the Amhara state as well. So calling it, creating a siege is really is completely unacceptable, because it undercuts and undermines the efforts, particularly the peace-loving people have indeed worked for that for quite a number of months. So not recognizing that bold move kind of insinuates that we are not in the same chapter, in the same line. So that's indeed, I heard it clear and loud, but through our bilateral engagement, you're going to explain that the purpose is not to make a siege, it is to save lives. The issue was that there wasn't any access. We said this has to be a series of law enforcement operation, believing that that will create an opportunity so that humanitarian assistance can easily flow unimpeded to the most needy people.
And does the Ethiopian government agree that some 400,000 people are currently suffering from famine?
Well, unless and otherwise we reach, there is an Ethiopian saying, maybe if a farmer miss one rainy season month, usually it's June, he or she will not recover through 7 consecutive Junes or rainy seasons. When they miss, it will be very difficult. So the decision was, we don't want our farmers to miss this month. If they do, there will be a lot of calamity will descend upon us. So the decision was, it's not about the numbers. I understand that the World Food Program, Save the Children, UNICEF, and a number of others have taken the responsibility and distributing even nutritious foods to the people on the ground. So we have to move fast, and our disaster coordination commission is right on the ground. But unfortunately, the TPLF people, it is reported that they have started even assassinating some of the aid workers whom they believe that they are working they have been working in close collaboration with the Ethiopian government or with the interim administration of Tigray. In the council, they were mentioning about electricity and also telecommunication lines. We are working hard to restore that, but we have to be very careful because 30 electrical engineers and telecom engineers have been murdered by the TPLF in maintaining those power lines. So the situation is very complex. It's not only always bashing and shaming the government, but the TPLF, as irresponsible as they are from day one, they have continued in attacking even people, on the field, trying to, day and night, to give services to our people. Thank you very much.
Just one last question.
It seems the Council will discuss the dam issue with Egypt and Sudan. So are you still planning to start filling the dam this month? What's your message to Sudan and Egypt on this issue? And where is diplomacy now? How can you describe the diplomatic track?
Yes, there is a AU, African Union-led process, still alive and working. Ethiopia puts, and including, of course, HUP, the Egypt and Sudan, put our trust on that process. And we don't believe any transboundary resource should be seen at the Council. We don't think it's the purview of the Council and the mandate of the Council. It's completely from the mandate of the Council. So we stick to the AU-led process. We are committed to that. There are some technical and legal issues. It shouldn't be politicized. It shouldn't be internationalized. I understand there are some countries who want to bring the issue to the Security Council, but this is not the way how to solve transboundary problems. If we're going to see this issue today, how many rivers, transboundary rivers, the world has? 250. So you guys are going to be very busy, asking questions about, transboundary resources as a source of conflict. That's completely unacceptable.
You will start filling it?
We can talk about that next week when the agenda will be tabled. What I can tell you is that we are closely working with the African Union. There are also observers that have been very much helpful over the years, and we put our trust and confidence in the AU peace, in AU lead process. Thank you very much.
One last question on Tigray. Have all the Eritreans left?
The latest report I have is that Eritreans have left.
They've left. They're gone. They've gone home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Loudest voices are coming from girls.